Women of Wyoming Then and Now is brought to you by the Wyoming Historical Society and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This program features unique female perspectives on events, themes, or narratives related to state history. We, the host, believe that one woman's action toward a better future can result in a greater legacy that inspires and equips many generations of women to come.
Welcome. I'm Linda Fabian, lay historian and author, and today the host of Women of Wyoming Then and Now. Joining me as co-host is author and historian Janelle Maloney. And with us now is our very special guest, Anne Holman, who has a deep connection to the Daughters of the American Revolution. And she's going to explain her interest and how she became involved in this wonderful aspect of Wyoming history. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you very much. Well, I've been working at Fort Caspar Museum in Caspar, Wyoming since 2009. And in 2022, we were going to host an event put on by the Wyoming Daughters of the American Revolution at our museum during their annual state conference. And when I learned that the President General of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution was coming out, and I was very interested in welcoming her by having a special exhibit on view while she was here that talked about the history of the DAR in Wyoming. And I got interested in the DAR in Wyoming because a friend of mine came in. I met her through the museum, and she said, "I bet you lunch you have an ancestor that was here during the American Revolution." And I said, "No, I know all of my ancestors came in the 19th century, so they would not have been participants in the American Revolution." Well, sure enough, I forgot about my great-grandmother, who died the year my father was born. And my great-grandfather had remarried, so none of us knew much about her. But lo and behold, she actually had ancestors that went back to Massachusetts in the 1600s. So we found a Patriot ancestor. So I became a part of the local chapter, Fort Caspar Chapter DAR. And it was in 2022 when the event was coming here that I decided to use my museum connections and my background in museum studies to put an exhibit together. Wyoming has had 16 chapters. Over the years, we are down to 10. 6 of them have disbanded. So I focused on all the chapters, their history, how they came about choosing their names, where they were located. I also did information panels on the ones that were disbanded. I actually put some of the panels behind me. I don't know if we can do show and tell, but this is what the panels look like. It's about 24 panels. Each chapter had their own panel with their history on it. We also did a history of the DAR in Wyoming and how it spread around.
But what does the DAR do across Wyoming? And now, not only now, but in the past.
Yeah.
I won't go into the national Daughters of the American Revolution so much as the Wyoming Daughters of the American Revolution, because we're doing it at our state level and the National Society is doing it at a national level. It began in 1890 when the Sons of the American Revolution refused to let women join their organizations. So they split off and did their own Daughters of the American Revolution. The Daughters of the American Revolution had a presence in Wyoming as early as 1894, so 4 years after the National Society. But it wasn't until 1899 that we had our first chapter, which was Jacques Laramie chapter in Laramie, Wyoming. And we formed our National Society in 1912. So they have enhanced our understanding of the trail history, especially, and marking historic sites of enormous historic value to our state. they're actually credited with increasing tourism to our state by marking all these historic battles, fort buildings like ours. Grace Raymond Hebard, who I'm sure has come up in other conversations if you talk about women in Wyoming, she founded the Jack Laramie chapter, the first chapter. She was a state regent. In 1912, she advocated the Wyoming state legislature to allot money to mark the trails through the state of Wyoming, the Oregon Trail especially. She was involved with the Oregon Trail Commission. She and another DAR state regent, Emily Patten, she and Grace Raymond Hebard were secretaries of the Oregon Trail Commission board. So they were very instrumental in marking the trails.
Why do you think it became so important for a woman to be marking these trails? I mean, it's just a line of dirt. What made that story become elevated to a point of passionate pursuit to get it done?
The three main goals of the DAR are education, patriotism, and historic preservation. Now, when they started in 1890, their goal was to preserve American Revolutionary War history. So we do not have American Independence, Revolutionary War history in Wyoming. There was not a lot going on in Wyoming, especially in terms of European American, Anglo-American settlements. Right. So it has broadened to encapsulate a goal to preserve the history of all of our nation's history, not just American Revolution history. I think also Grace Raymond Hebard was very anxious that the role women played in U.S. immigration was not forgotten. So they made special point of acknowledging Narcissa Whitman and Eliza Spaulding on the Oregon trails. Yeah. We continue to mark places of importance to women's history. So it's just that one of their goals, educating the population, supporting our troops, Americanization of new citizens. All those things are core values of people who join the DAR, and our mission is to strengthen those in our country.
You make that sound like something every woman could easily and should be part of.
I would think so. I mean, I've always sort of been opposed to joining any group that wouldn't let anyone in who was interested. But this is a lineage society, so it is strictly based on whether you can link yourself to someone who participated, even in a civilian way, in the American Revolution. It's open to women 18 years of age or older, regardless of race, ethnic background, religion, all that kind of stuff. So in that way, we're pretty open. But what I think differentiates, to me, for this service, it's a service organization. We pick up trash. We go to American naturalization ceremonies. We are involved in those kind of things. We support veterans. But for me, I am a historian. I love history. I work in a history museum. And that extra component of historic preservation is what really drew me in.
Yeah, very well said. I mean, there's so much more to the DAR than just military history or just genealogy. Yet it's very important to make sure that we have those connections.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about, how the DAR is involved with women's suffrage and making sure that the women who were involved with suffrage in our state are recognized. I don't want Esther Hobart Morris to be forgotten, and her efforts to bring suffrage to the Wyoming territorial legislation, because it was through her efforts that in 1869, the first woman suffrage legislation in the U.S. was passed.
Right,
The
that's a huge
DAR
deal.
is a huge deal. Well, what I find so interesting is that was 21 years before Wyoming became a state in 1890. Women had the right to vote, and women across the nation did not. It was 51 years before the 19th Amendment in 1920. So for 51 years, the women of Wyoming were voting. And in 1870, it was Louisa Swain in Laramie that cast the first ballot. And she is considered, I had to write this down, the first woman in the world to cast a ballot under laws giving women full equality to men in 1870. I am going to read what Grace Raymond Hebard said about that. She said, "What does it mean? Nothing more or nothing less than that woman is equal to the responsibility of nation building."
Ooh.
She said that in 1869 when that legislation was passed.
That's quite progressive.
Yeah. So many people think that history in general is boring. And I suspect that through some of the exhibits that you work on and your participation in DAR, that you get past that and you help people understand that it's much more than just words in a book. Can you describe a little bit about how you might approach that?
I actually get paid to do that because in my job here at Fort Caspar Museum, I greet visitors to the museum. I cannot tell you how many times people have walked out of our museum shaking their heads saying, "I had no idea how much history was here." And I love telling them about our history because before I moved here, I never thought about Wyoming as part of the trails. We also have Fort Caspar history. The fort was established here on the emigrant trails to protect the telegraph line out to California during the Civil War. So we had Union soldiers stationed here during the American Civil War, 1862 to 1867, till after the war, protecting that telegraph line against the Indians, knocking it down, not Confederates, but keeping that telegraph line connected out to California because California was part of the Union. I grew up in California too. I never think of California as part of the Union effort. But actually, if I think about it, San Francisco does have a Union fort. They had Union soldiers stationed there. So I love telling people that history. We had battles during the Civil War. Okay, there were Indian battles, but pivotal Indian battles. We had soldiers here from Kansas, Ohio, West Virginia, and other places like that, things you don't think about. Now, I do agree, it is a little funny. One time I had a news reporter come in to interview a couple of us about the DAR, an event we were doing, and he wanted to be in the museum in front of an exhibit about the American Revolution. And we tried to explain to him 3 or 4 times that that is not the history that we cover. But what I would like to emphasize is that the descendants of those patriots went west, and here we are. We don't have any American Revolutionary War battles. We don't have any grave sites of heroes from the American Revolution, but their blood relatives, their descendants are here, and they're in California, and they're in Arizona. So we are all connected.
So in your career, has there been any one person, particularly perhaps a female person, that you have been inspired by that has helped you want to develop more of a relationship with the DAR history that you have?
Well, the woman that recruited me, my friend, and she was our chapter regent, and she also has served at this state regent. Her name is Susan Littlefield Haynes. She owns the Goth Ranch and has really pursued the history of that historic ranch in our Natrona County history. She sponsored a book that was written by Jefferson Glass. So she really inspired me. I love her involvement with the DAR, her love of history. She puts herself into a project, financially, emotionally, with the time and effort. She really does all of that. Plus, she does all the other things the DAR does. So I would say she is the most inspirational to me because of all that she does.
What kind of encouragement or advice would you give to others to help them understand or develop a love of Wyoming history and perhaps the pillars of the American Revolution?
Ooh.
I know.
For me, history is a passion of mine. When I am not at work, when I'm on vacation, I make it a point of visiting historic sites. When I hear about people talking about history and very interesting historical places I can visit or things I can read about, I hop right online and I look for them and I find out a way to get there. If I can, work it into a vacation I'm already doing. So just develop that love of history wherever you go. Make it part of your travels. Be interested in the place you live. A lot of us don't really explore the place we live, then the places we live, places we can drive to from where we live on weekends or such. But I would just say explore, find out what's out there.
I felt that a little bit when you were bringing that up because, spoiler alert, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I did not go to the Grand Canyon until I was in my 30s. Like, we just take advantage of it. I lived in California. I did not go to Disneyland until the weekend I moved. Why do we do this? Now is the right time. Now, not when you're leaving, not as a bucket list. Now is the right time to look at your local history and have fun with it. Get into it.
And is there anything else that you would like to add and tell us about what the DAR has done in Wyoming in particular, or anything else that you would like to share?
One of my favorite things that I learned doing the Wyoming Women of the DAR exhibit was that it was the DAR in Wyoming that got us our state flag and our state flower. Because it was in 1916, Grace Raymond Hebard, again, as part of a national society call to get every state to have a state flag. We did not have a state flag. It was 1916. We've been a state for 26 years. And so Grace Raymond Hebard, out of her own pocket, ran a contest in the newspaper for anyone to submit a design. And you would win this $20 if your design was chosen as the possible Wyoming state flag. And the winner was Verna Keyes, who married a man named Keyes. So Verna Keyes, she was just out of art school, the Art Institute of Chicago, and she drew what we know now as the Wyoming state flag with the buffalo inside of the seal. And the Wyoming Women of the DAR, they lobbied the legislation. Hebard had a bunch of cards with the flag on it distributed. They gave them to soldiers going off to Europe at the beginning of World War I before we were even in the war. So it was a whole campaign to get this passed. Sure enough, 1917, it was approved. And the same with the flowers. She had somebody draw a beautiful Indian paintbrush and distributed the cards all over. She had the women contact their legislators, and we now have the Indian paintbrush as our state flower. So those were two things, especially the flag, that we see every day that the Wyoming DAR were instrumental in establishing in our state.
Very, very important contributions indeed, not only individually, but collectively as a group. I think that that's all the time we have for today's interview. We're certain there's much more to be learned from your experiences as a historian and as a member of the DAR. We're so delighted to talk to you and to be able to pass these discussions down to others who may have questions or who want to look further into your life or into the lives of those in their own personal past. So as a starting point for our listeners, we will offer resource opportunities, websites, archival materials that people might be able to study. And thank you so much for joining us today. Your contribution to Wyoming history is critical.
Thank you so much for doing the work that you do to lift other women up and to get more women involved in these important preservation activities.
Thank you. And I'm hoping I'm getting women proud of what they've done too, and proud of what other women have done. We need to lift each other up.
Definitely.
Exactly. Absolutely.